Hello, and thank you for joining us today for The Issues. I'm your host, Vern Fuller. If you think heroin is only a problem in poor and inner city areas, you are wrong, dead wrong. The number of deaths in Missouri caused by heroin has doubled in recent years and growing, especially among suburban youth. On today's show, we focus on how this highly addictive narcotic is destroying lives and communities more than ever before, and what, if anything, can be done to stop this epidemic. People who become addicted to heroin put themselves at risk for disease and even death. One of the other unpleasant side effects is its impact on families. Sometimes the addiction takes hold of several family members at a time. Take this recent story in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch newspaper, where a Bonne Terre, Missouri man is now facing second-degree murder charges, accused of providing his 19-year-old son with a deadly dose of heroin, then preventing anyone from calling for help while his son lay dying. As disturbing as that story is, there are many more like it. Today on The Issues, we have two women who will tell us their personal stories of addiction and road to recovery, plus insights from those who have seen the devastating effects of heroin close up. We want your input as well. Please give us your questions on our STL TV Facebook page at The Issues. We'll read one of them live later on in the show. But first, STL TV correspondent Tim Lampley introduces us to 41-year-old Sagan Dressler, who spent more than half of her life hooked on heroin. Now clean and sober, she says addiction nearly cost her everything.
At a glance, you would never know 41-year-old Sagan Dressler was hooked on heroin for 23 years. What were you like before the addiction?
I was real active in sports. I was big in swimming and was on a softball team in high school. Spent a lot of time with my family. My sisters were my best friends growing up.
Sagan grew up in a two-parent home in Chesterfield, Missouri. She became strung out on drugs trying to escape the memory of a traumatic incident. At 21, she was raped. Afraid and ashamed to tell anyone, she found comfort in heroin.
I had a friend that was experimenting with it at the time, and she had stopped by my apartment, and I just tried it on a whim, and it made everything go away.
Like an unrelenting tornado, heroin shattered the life she once knew, tearing apart everything she valued.
It's affected every relationship. I've lost so many friends. I quit showing up for, parties, events, because it was just so much more important to get high.
Sagan's never-ending search for the euphoric high she got with heroin led to a new low, an arrest and conviction for armed robbery.
I ended up in a car with two people. I was on my way to the city to get some heroin, and they stopped and robbed a restaurant, and I ended up getting a 12-year prison sentence, and I did 5 years on it.
Sagan's story is like so many others who are still on the streets using, leaving police wondering how to stop this epidemic from spreading so rapidly throughout the region. Captain Troy Doyle from St. Louis County's Drug Enforcement Bureau says family members may be able to help if they notice the signs.
When she starts seeing a family member or individual all of a sudden starts stealing for a reason, that's an indication. If you start seeing spoons inside the residence that's burnt from heating up the drugs, that's an indication.
Authorities tell me heroin is not considered an inner-city drug, perhaps because it's not attached to a needle anymore. It can be snorted or smoked and is very inexpensive. What
you get with heroin, obviously you get a lot of Caucasians or whites from the suburbs that come into the inner city to purchase heroin. And ultimately sometimes overdose depending on the purity level that they get. The problem that you have in the inner city, though, is that you have the people that are selling the heroin are shooting and killing one another over clientele and over territory.
I guess I'll have a frozen chocolate monkey.
Meanwhile, Sagan is putting the pieces of her life back together. She's been clean for 18 months now.
I don't understand how I used to be able to stay up for 2 and 3 days at a time, just on the run, moving around, doing everything I did. I just have such a peace in my heart, and it's the first time I've ever felt this way.
For STL TV, I'm Tim Lampley.
Joining us now on the show today is Melissa Maybearry, a recovering addict who just completed a treatment program with the Department of Corrections. Also Sagan Dressler, who was featured in the story you just saw, and who spent more than 2 decades trying to kick her heroin habit. And Diana Harris, who is with the St. Louis Department of Corrections as area coordinator with a substance abuse treatment program. Welcome, ladies, to The Issues.
Thank you.
Melissa, let's start with you. How did you first get into being hooked on heroin? We saw your story, Sagan.
I was introduced to it by a guy I was dating and also other friends at the time.
Was it your first drug of choice?
No, it wasn't.
Okay. What did you do before heroin?
Marijuana, and I experimented with other drugs through high school. When I was about 20, though, and I tried the heroin, I immediately became addicted.
At the age of 20?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. I was hooked. It was just, I just liked the feeling.
How could you relate to Sagan's story?
Well, I think the main thing is the family issues. It's affected my family also because...
How?
Well, they, you know, they've dealt with the incarcerations. They've dealt with my financial instabilities. They've helped me financially, you know, and then helping me with my children. You know, taking care of them when I was in and out of prison.
Okay. Sagan, everybody wants to know, how does a young white girl from Chesterfield get sucked into the world of heroin addiction?
I just tried it. Like they said, a traumatic experience had happened, and I just couldn't stop. The feeling was amazing, but 23 years later, it wasn't worth it.
You were how old when you started?
My early 20s. I have a hard time remembering the exact age, 23, 22, 23. I had just finished nursing school.
Nursing school?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
So you were going to become a nurse?
Yes.
RN?
Well, LPN, but I was going to finish my RN, yes.
Okay. And what stopped that?
Heroin, just like, you know, everything else. It put a damper on everything in my life. Caused a lot of problems with my family, relationships, and really the hardest part is, you know, just getting past all the damage you do to other people and forgiving yourself.
Tell us about some of the damage.
Trust issues, you know, telling your parents or family or friends that you aren't getting high anymore, and then they get a collect call from jail and they know everything was a lie. Same with Melissa, you know, several apartments, helping with cars. And then when I end up in jail, they have to go pack all that stuff up. And they've always supported me. They always have until this last incarceration. And I really think that's what straightened me up, was the actual thought of losing my family.
Okay. Melissa, how did you support your habit?
Various ways. Usually taking friends. I had the car, and I would take friends, and you know, like they would give me dope for that. And then, you know, I did start criminal activity myself.
Such as?
Such as stealing. That's really the main thing, really. Mm-hmm. You know, and I've been to prison 3 times due to my addiction, and every time it progresses even worse. Even the criminal activity progresses, actually.
Okay. Diana Harris, what kind of condition are these ladies in by the time they come to you?
By the time they get to us with the Missouri Department of Corrections, they are in bad shape. Because we do everything we can to keep them in the community. We refer them to community treatment. So we give them those options. We just don't automatically send people to prison based on one arrest charge. We give them probation, we give them chances, we refer them to treatment in the community, because it's much better to treat them in the community than send them to prison. So by the time they get to us, they are in bad shape. You know, they are already really strung out. They've had the criminal charges. So you have the criminality and the drug addiction behind you, and the drug addiction is what drives the criminal activity. Mm-hmm. So they are in extremely bad shape by the time they get this. Usually in jail, while they're in jail, is when they're going through the withdrawal symptoms. So when they come to the Missouri Department of Corrections, they're probably past that stage, and then they move on to another stage. If they're lucky enough to get into an institutional treatment program where they have time to work on their issues and really re-examine their life, family, you know, what they've lost, all the disconnections that they made. So they have that time, and when they get ready to re-enter, we send them back into the community, into aftercare programs. We just don't put them back on the street. We try to refer them back into aftercare programs. And here recently, we started some pilot projects that offers some medicated assisted treatment inside of the Missouri Department of Corrections before they come out, so they have a chance. Unfortunately, we lost a young woman back in February. You know, she was in the institution. She wanted to actually get the medication, had other pending charges, some conflict in court cases. By the time we couldn't keep her in, you know, based on some Missouri statutes, she got out, went to her probation officer. 2 weeks later, she had overdosed and died on heroin.
Well, since we're on the topic, you brought it up. How much death are you seeing with those who you work with in the system?
In our system, and I'm in the eastern region, one of the probation and parole districts reported they're losing 3 a month, and that is in the St. Charles area. So this is in the county. You know, even in the St. Louis region, we do lose several. We have several overdoses, and we lose several a month. I would say maybe 3 to 4, depending on the area, depending on the time of the year. I remember back in April, in 1 week, there were 3 overdoses. Only one of them that week resulted in a death. But there were 3 overdoses in 1 week just in 2 of my programs.
Now, if I understand correctly, Sagan, you went through a treatment program, came out, and went right back to using?
Several times.
Several times? Mm-hmm. So, Melissa Sagan, why is it so hard to stop heroin?
I think that the main thing, it's not just the drugs, it's the behaviors behind it. Because if you don't change your behaviors and you don't reestablish the morals and values, you're basically still in the active addictive mind. You're just not ingesting drugs. I mean, so it's like a lifestyle change. It's not just putting down the dope. Like, you have to change every aspect in your life, you know. And so many times I didn't do that. I thought I had it together. I thought, you know, I got complacent, and then the next thing for me is to pick up, because nothing's changing.
And then, with that being said, what was your moment of clarity?
My moment of clarity, I was in prison. I knew if I didn't complete this treatment center, the treatment program, I was facing 10 years in prison. And that was a wake-up call. You know, I had never been locked up that long, and actually been able to have my mind clear that long, where I could reflect back on what I've done and then what I wanted in life, you know. And I decided in that time that this is it for me. I don't want to die in active heroin addiction, you know. I don't. And so I made my mind up, and my self-worth started to grow, my self-esteem. I felt empowered, because the program in the treatment center at Vandalia was a really good structured program, and that's what I needed.
So you're implying that heroin took away your self-esteem and a lot of other...
Yes.
Really? How
yes.
so?
You know, some of the things that I've done go against my morals and values. Some of the things I did to get the heroin while I was using the heroin, those go against just my morals and values and just humanity of the person that I want to be. Like, I was doing things that I didn't want to do, but in my mind, I justified doing it because I knew I just wanted to get high.
And how many people in your circle, Sagan, died as a result of heroin usage? How frequent was that?
With me, since February, my roommate at MERS, and then another girl that I was roommate with when I did my 120 days in Vandalia treatment, both got out and chose to use again, and they both OD'd and died.
Wow.
So that's two acquaintances that I've known just in the last 5 months.
And I got out of prison in December, and just since then, I know of 3 people that I was in there with have OD'd and died. But I mean, even before that, at least 1 person a month that I knew of, that you heard of, you know.
Diana, is your approach different to those who go through treatment, come out and use, and then you find them back in the system?
The approach isn't any different. What's different is some of them are ready and some of them are not. And if you're not ready and you have such a huge amount of product on the street, it's there. It's there, just there for you. Now, number one, when they come in, nobody wants to go to prison. So if their mind is not open and ready to make some changes, then our approach isn't any different than what it is. Matter of fact, the length of time in treatment is what is the predictor of the outcome. So the longer we can keep them, you know, engaged in treatment, that improves their outcome tremendously. I've had some offenders come in for 3 or 4 120-day programs, and they said, okay, I'm on the 4th one, I finally got it. Okay. So, you know, but the length of time in treatment is a predictor for the success in treatment because it gives them time to think. But we don't really do anything different as opposed to just being there. Unfortunately, you got the criminal justice side that says you have to be there. You know, but you in your mind and getting to that point where what was my bottom? What brought that clarity? Mm-hmm. That's up to the client. That's up to the offender. That's up to them in terms of especially the drug in and of itself, what leads them to the criminal activity. And then it goes in phases. I think that some people aren't trying to, because they're a heroin addict, just automatically turn to criminal activity. But over a period of time, you don't have any money. You know, pharmaceutical drugs, I know the Office of National Drug Control Policy did June 19th, they did a huge webinar on pharmaceutical addiction, which leads to heroin addiction. So the pharmaceutical epidemic in this country is probably, again, a big factor in what's driving the street heroin addiction.
I wish we had more time to get into that particular topic, but I do want to ask, like, Melissa, Sagan, what plans do you have for the rest of your lives now that you've gotten off heroin?
I have great plans for myself. My self-worth's grown, my self-esteem, I'm working, I'm actually financially supporting myself. I don't make a whole lot of money where I'm at, but I'm grateful for it. You know, and things are rebuilding. You know, I'm meeting milestones that I have never met. You know, and I also have 22 months clean, and I've never had that either throughout my addiction. You know, and so many milestones are coming about, and I'm so grateful. And, you know, I plan on just keep doing it one day at a time because, you know, I have goals set for 5 years, for 10 years, but really I try to get through the day, the week, you know.
Wonderful. Sagan?
My goals are just to take it one day at a time. I've damaged so many relationships, and I'm just working on repairing them with my family, hopefully to get a better job than what I have now, but I'm grateful for everything. I have a savings account. Everything's starting to fall in place. My family lets me in their home when they're not there. They give me the key to their house. They trust me to be there. My sister trusts me with her son, and everything's just falling into place, and I just hope it gets better because I don't ever want to go back to that way of life again. I'm through.
Congratulations, ladies, on your successful recovery thus far. I wish you all the best. Dana Harris, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. When we come back, we'll talk with our panel of leaders about the St. Louis community's response to heroin addiction. We'll be right back after this message.
Dwell on it. You got to keep it moving. Sean got out of the hospital and he got his rest. He was back to doing his activities.
Welcome back to The Issues. I'm Vern Fuller. If you're just joining us, we are discussing the heroin epidemic spreading throughout our region. With me now on the panel is Captain Troy Doyle, Commander of the Bureau of Drug Enforcement for the St. Louis County Police Department, Wardell Carter, owner of the West End Clinic. He has run the clinic for over 20 years, and Stephen Deere, a reporter from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, who recently wrote a very insightful story about an Imperial woman who tried everything to get her son off of heroin. Gentlemen, welcome to The Issues.
Yeah, thank you.
Stephen, let's start with you. You've covered a number of these heroin stories. What's been the most shocking and amazing in your eyes?
A couple of things. I would say in that story you just mentioned about Sherry Gavin from Imperial, most eye-opening experience throughout all of that, I covered that story from start to finish, was during her trial. She was actually charged with misdemeanor assault for hitting her son's dealer, or her son's alleged dealer, with a baseball bat. And during jury selection, they had to get a pool of about 40 people just for that misdemeanor assault case, and they had to dismiss half of them because so many of them had had kids, brothers, sisters, cousins, whoever, that had used the drugs, had had horrible experiences with the drugs, and a lot of them said, there's no way I could ever vote to convict her for what she did.
And amazingly enough, I read your story, her son died.
Yes.
Of an overdose.
Yes, he did.
She
a
literally,
year later.
Yeah. She literally tried everything she could. What other kind of stories have really been eye-opening for you?
So I've written a couple of stories, mostly focusing on the journey of the parents, because this is a suburban problem, young kids. What does a parent do when their kid has maybe taken some pain medication after a sports injury, and now they've gotten addicted to it and they're turning to heroin? And these parents really have an excruciating journey. A really difficult path. They're in this they got to make these hard choices about not enabling their kid, but at the same time trying to help them too. And what do you do when you're presented with those kinds of circumstances? And they take enormous amount of responsibility for their kids' use.
Wardell Carter, you've run the West End Clinic for over 20 years. What is it about heroin that is so powerful that it is so hard for people to stop? I mean, they actually have to get on to another drug to try to get off of heroin. Share with us some of that.
Well, I mean, from what my client base, what they tell me is that, you know, it's just something that's hard to kick once you're introduced to it. And you know, God, I don't think there's any answer as to why they, you know, they get hooked on the methadone and, I mean, on the heroin. But they look to me to help them get off the heroin with the medication-assisted treatment that we provide.
Okay. Okay. I want to go to our Facebook question because I think it's very relative. The question comes from Melanie Richardson. Why are parents getting high with their children, and what is law enforcement doing about this? And it makes me think of the Bonne-Terre man who shot up his 19-year-old son and he died. But Wardell, you know of generations.
Right. We've treated grandparents, their children, and then their great-grandchildren. And I mean, they were all coming to the clinic, you know, at the same time, you know. But
let me divert this over to Captain Doyle, because this is really more in your arena.
Right. Obviously, it's an issue, and Mr. Carter mentioned that when we come across these issues, we actually see kids parents who obviously done drugs prior to, so it's acceptable in that household. The problem that you run in this particular case with drugs is that it's unlike any other crime. Like, usually you can get someone that would turn in a family member if they did a robbery or kill someone. But you rarely get where a parent would turn in a child for drug use or a child would turn into a parent for drug use. But obviously once we made aware of those situations, obviously we deal with it.
I mean, are there any special prosecuting, I mean, obviously this guy in Bonne-Terre is going up for second-degree murder, but I mean, this is his son. And how frequently are we seeing this kind of thing within families?
I don't see it a whole lot in the county, but there has been cases where we work where the parents were utilizing some form of narcotics in front of the kids, and we also charge the parent with child endangerment too. Okay.
Okay. Wardell, how effective is the methadone program? And I'm just curious, of your patients or clients, do you deal with a death percentage?
We do, but you know, it's only because, well, it's not so much, there's a lot of overdose, but the death, it happens, but it doesn't happen that often with the city residents. I'm saying that we hear about it in the county, but we never hear about the overdoses in the city. You know, it's epidemic now in suburban America, but it's always been there in, you know, my community. So I don't know if it's because they know what they're doing, you know, to keep from dying, but and if they were really keeping statistics on the Black death, you know, in the cities, you know, we know what it's going. You know, we hear about it all the time in the county, but we never hear about it in the city. And I don't know if it's because of the Post-Dispatch or whatever, the news media, but you know, it's been there all along.
That's a good point. Captain Doyle, what do you think the reason for the epidemic in the county actually can be attributed to?
What we're finding out in the county is a couple of different things. You got kids that are just curious. They want to get high. You know, we were all young at one time. During my generation, marijuana was big. But now you got people that's looking for stronger, more potent type form of getting high. And what we're learning in the county is that most of the cases that we come across are people or kids who have taken either medication from their parents' medicine cabinet and start using it, or again, just breaking into residential homes to steal it to get high. So.
And Stephen, is that what you're finding in your research and stories, that this is starting with prescription medications from the parents?
Yeah, no, not from the parent. Well, in some cases, yeah, from the parents, or they went to a friend's house and got it from their parents' medicine cabinet. But in a lot of cases, I mean, these kids were started off on pain medication that they legitimately needed for some type of injury or some type of recovery from an operation, and then that's when they get hooked. And the pain medication, to buy that on the street is much more expensive than to buy heroin.
Wardell, you're shaking your head.
Well, I'm saying, you know, that's the accepted suburban kind of definition. But we know that, you know, you're hanging out with your friends. They say, hey, I got something here. It's not that medicine cabinet so much. It's like, hey, you know, I got some, check this out. And, you know, bang, you're doing heroin. Somebody slipped, and you get that euphoric feeling. It was like, wow, I've never had this before. And that's how it starts, you know.
Well, I want to throw this out to the panel. Is marijuana the gateway drug, or are these kids going straight to gladiator school and doing heroin?
Well, my opinion is this, and I answer that by saying this. I've grown up with, I've known people who've used marijuana, and as they got older, they stopped using it and didn't graduate to anything else. But I also known people who have used marijuana who did graduate to doing cocaine and heroin and some of these other dangerous drugs out there.
Captain Doyle, I wish we had more time to continue. Wardell Carter, Stephen Deere, thank you all for joining us. Before we wrap up, here's the contact information for anyone seeking help with drug or alcohol addiction. The National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Abuse for the St. Louis area, 314-962-3456, ncada-stl.org. We hope we have provided a lively discussion about a very important issue facing the St. Louis community. We'd also like for you to be part of our efforts as well. So please join us for our next show and continue to support us here at STL TV. As you know, it takes a village. Also, continue leaving your comments on our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and check us out on our YouTube channel. I'm Vern Fuller. For all of us here on The Issues, create a great day.